Over the years, our kids have had a lot of illnesses. 6 kids means a lot of childhood sniffles and coughs. And when our kids weren't feeling well, it affected our entire home. Luckily, some clever guys in Brisbane have come up with the perfect solution: Rehydrate.
Rehydrate are delicious drinks that rehydrate up to 3 times faster than water alone, packed with essential electrolytes. Rehydrate is one of the few rehydration products that is safe for all ages. Stock up at Coles and be prepared whenever illness strikes.
We just don't always have our eyes and ears open to those opportunities. I saw the Ironman on television, so I'm watching it. There's a Wood athlete, he doesn't finish. I saw that. A friend of mine had swum the English Channel. He said, if I can do it, you can do it. That's how that came about. So when I found out that no Wood athlete had done the English Channel as well as any Ironman, that was an added bonus to be the first, but also again to inspire kids in wheelchairs.
This is the Parenting in Perspective podcast. It's a Happy Families podcast. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson. In June of 1988, John Maclean went out for a ride on his bike. That training ride for the Nepean Triathlon would change John's life forever. John was hit by an 8-ton truck, which left him with multiple breaks to his arms, pelvis, and back. Amazingly, John survived the accident but was left as a paraplegic. The accident, though, ended up being the making of John. In 1998, John became the first wheelchair athlete to successfully swim the English Channel, and in 2000, he represented Australia at the Sydney Paralympics, reaching the final of the 1,500-metre wheelchair race. Now, it's a bit of a cliche that behind every great man is an even greater woman, but cliches aside, in this case, I think it's absolutely true. So I've invited John along for the podcast conversation today, along with his wife, Amanda, to really get a sense of their story. And I began by asking John what family life looked like for him as a child. My
parents immigrated from Scotland. I'm so glad they did, because I much prefer growing up with the sun in Australia than in the winters in Scotland. And they were kind of immigrants who kind of came over. My mother suffered from mental health, so I kind of spent the first 5 years in a foster home with my brother and sister who were older. And unfortunately, Mum took a life when I was about 4 years of age. So for the first 5 years, I was in a foster home.
So, John, while you're in that foster home and your mum's going through her mental illness challenge and ultimately dying by suicide, where's Dad?
Dad's trying to make sense of all this. So, again, he's immigrated. He was told to give the kids up for adoption. That was the language that was which he shared with me. He chose not to do that, and we'll be forever grateful that he wanted to still make a living for his family. So, therefore, by having us 3 kids, very young, in foster care, that then allowed him to focus on 3 jobs, not just one, to generate enough of an income to get on the list of a housing commission house for us to leapfrog, which we ended up doing. So Dad was doing all that he can to build a foundation for allowing us to get a house and move forward. So that's what he was doing.
Okay. And you grew up in Mount Druitt. There's no polite way to say it. It's known as a pretty rough part of Sydney, one of the roughest parts of Sydney.
Mount Druitt Housing Commission, kind of fibro, blue collar, people, doing their best. So Dad would have to drive to St Mary's Station, get an hour's trip into the city, work there, and then come back home again. So, he committed so much of his time to provide for us as a family. After my birth mother passed away, he was also an entertainer. His love was singing and his passion. So that was one of the ways he generated income. And he was also an advanced driving instructor. So he was working in the city in the mailroom. So there's 3 jobs. And you're right, Mount Druitt is a tough place to grow up. But if you know no different, you know no different.
John, you get into your teenage years, you start to be recognised as a sports person, and you start looking pretty seriously at a rugby league career.
Yeah, I think as a little boy, Dad kind of introduced my brother and I, Mark's 3 years older, to sport. He said it's a good way of meeting people and making friends. He was right. And rugby league was something in our local area that we were both passionate about, as well as little athletics. My gift was kind of running. I used to do okay at that. When Dad would kind of get us in the Penrith uniform back in the day and going and cheering on the Penrith Panthers, that was a really big experience for us to have as brothers. And I think that then planted the seed for me as a young boy imagine what it would be like to run on that paddock and get paid to be a professional athlete. So that's where my kind of dreams started to unfold around wanting to chase sport as a living.
Okay. Now, the story takes a fairly dramatic turn from here, and you were really interested in triathlon, probably a little bit ahead of your time, but you were training for a triathlon, the Nepean Triathlon in 1988. Your world changed forever on that day. What happened that day? How much do you remember about it, and what's happened since?
So I was going to race against my buddy at the time who we got introduced to the sport in 86. So this is, competitive friendship. I won the first race, he won the second, and therefore 1988 was going to be the decider on who between us was the better athlete. That was our focus at the time. So in preparation for that training, I was out on my bicycle. I got hit by a truck, broke my back and damaged my spinal cord as well as other bones. Spent 4 months in a spinal unit, and that dramatically changed my world because I think that was my first real experience about suffering from the depression of knowing that I wouldn't fulfill the dreams that I had at that stage. Losing my legs was a really difficult thing because that was my love of running and competing. Can you describe
not that we want to dwell on the drama and kind of get excited about the crash, but I think that it's important in setting the context for people to understand just how serious this incident was.
So the speed limit at the time was 110. So that's on the police report. That was the speed that the truck was going. The offending truck, which is the truck that hit me, was about to overtake another truck, looked in the side view mirror. The truck then veered to the left, collided with me, and the truck continued to go forward. A motorbike rider saw the accident from behind and waved the driver down about a kilometre down the freeway and bipping his horn just to notify him that he'd been involved in an accident. Damage to me, and again, no recollection from being hit from behind, and I think that's a kind of blessing. There's no reoccurring nightmares of that picture because I don't have a picture of that. Damage to me, I broke my back in 3, pelvis in 4 right side, broken arm twice right side, broken ribs, punctured lungs. I think anything else really doesn't matter because if you're able to survive something like that without brain damage, that's a miracle in some people's eyes. And then if you're able to live. So let's call living number 1. Let's call not having brain damage number 2. And then, what does that then look like? So as a incomplete paraplegic, I vividly remember waking up after coming out of the coma and being in a world of pain. My parents were notified that I'd been involved in an accident, initially saying that your son's broken his pelvis. So mum and dad make their way to Westmead Hospital. And then Dad was told late that night via the surgeon he didn't expect me to live due to the extent of the injuries. So that's tough for any parent. So fortunately, I was able to pull through. I think a couple of days after that was then transferred via helicopter. So there's 4 days in Westmead to a spinal unit and therefore to start to go through ICU and move through that process. When I first saw myself in the mirror in terms of lacerations and how quickly our body becomes emaciated or wastes away, there's always this internal dialogue around, I don't like what I'm seeing, how can anybody else? And what am I going to do with my life? My job wanting to be a fireman, can't do that. I mean, all these kind of reoccurring dark thoughts, because there's nothing that's bright and exciting and there's no sunshine at all. It's all dark clouds. So, and then over time you start to come to terms with the fact, hey, I'm really lucky, I'm alive. And then when I was moved into the general ward, which was 8 weeks later after the bones had kind of knitted back together again, I realised that there were a lot more people worse off than myself, and therefore having encouraging words from my father, from my brother, from my doctor started to create shades of light to give me hope moving forward.
Yeah, so I hear that, John, and I just think it's extraordinary. Your entire life has blown up and you've gone through this darkness for 8 weeks, and then you, in the general ward, think, actually, my bones are healing, and you're having this shift already, and you're pointing to the support from your brother and from your dad, from your family. Why is it, John, that you think that you were able to start to make these shifts and I guess in some ways build hope where so many other people struggle with that?
Well, I think all of us wear masks in life. I have no doubt about that. And how you present, you might present different to your wife than you would to a corporate audience, for example, or your best friend or your brother. I mean, there's all different masks that we that we wear. Back to the spinal unit, everything that you think you have is stripped away very quickly. So it's the essence of who you are is kind of because the shell of the body is broken. Just picture you at your absolute worst moment. And therefore, that's then perspective on what truly does matter. And, I remember praying for such a long time that I could do something with my life and hopefully I could inspire kids in wheelchairs. And so that's where all that started for me when everything else was ripped away. So someone has a complete spinal cord lesion, either in their neck or their back. The brain is connected to the spinal cord, which is the central nervous system. Basically, it serves two functions, on the way down to move and on the way up to feel or motor or sensory. So if the spinal cord's been damaged, those messages are then interrupted. So someone who's complete has no movement or no feeling beyond where they've had their level of lesion damage to the spinal cord. Someone like me, which most people are, as I understand, are incomplete, so there's still some sparing of the pathways. So that person would still have some movement and some feeling. And because the spinal cord is so complex, every single person is different, every single person. And I think when I looked at my dad, him saying, son, I'll give you my legs if I could, which, my dad has passed away. And, they were just beautiful words at the time that a son that was broken needed to hear. My brother saying, John, this is going to be a marathon opposed to a sprint. Okay, I could understand that because I used to run around, meaning, it's got to take a while. My family doctor came in to visit me as well to say, John, don't worry, you will be bigger, stronger and faster, and then left the room. So what did he do? He provided a seed of hope for someone who had nothing at the time. So that was the perspective to go, okay, these are the cards that have been dealt to me. How do I then start to build a wall of confidence to move forward in life?
So, John, you're laying in the hospital bed, you've been through intensive care, you're now in the spinal unit, then you end up in a general ward. How long did you stay in hospital after the crash?
I was there for 4 months, which is, back then, that was relatively quick. A para who's complete would be there for, at that stage, about 6 months. A quadriplegic would be there for 12 months.
Okay.
So it's a long, long time.
You get to a point somewhere around maybe the 12-month mark where you've been doing your best to build up your muscles. You've been doing your best to build up your strength. You've been hobbling around on crutches, trying to get your legs to work, and it's just not happening. You kind of get to this point where you look at your dad and say, Dad, I'm going to be in a wheelchair. This whole walking thing, I don't think I can do it. And he says something to you that day that remains a living motto for you right now and inspires me, and I love to share your story when I'm talking about resilience with people. Can you describe the scenario leading up to what he said to you and then what he said?
Yeah, you remember my doctor had said to me, Dr. Gabriel was his name, he's passed as well. When he said bigger, stronger, faster, I took that literally. Like, I'm going to get back and I'm going to run and I'm going to do all the things that I used to do. That was the mindset at the time. So 12 months after the accident, when I was in the bedroom with my dad, I said to my dad, I'm trying really hard. And when you talk about people giving 100%, most of us are nowhere near that line. Call that a line. I'm going to say that Usain Bolt got really close to his. Maybe he hit his line. So as a reference point. So I guess I'd hit my line as well. And I said to Dad, I'm trying really hard. And Dad then said, son, you got hit by a truck. Look how far you've come. And that's when the light bulb went off for me, knowing that I was not going to get any better. And that's when he posed the beautiful question, son, how far can you go? Which then allowed me to go, okay, embrace the wheelchair rather than, hate the wheelchair. Instead of smashing myself or punishing myself, hobbling around on crutches all the time, which took a lot of energy to do. I then embraced the wheelchair and I was like, okay, what can I do as a wheelchair athlete? And that started to open the doors in lots of different ways. So, I'm very grateful that Dad asked that question.
I love the question. Look how far you've come. Now, how far can you go? I can hear parents resonating with that all around the country and around the world going, I'm going to try that next time my child refuses to play the piano or won't do their homework. But look how far you've come. How far can you go? John, you eventually, over the next few years, I think it was 1993, you trained yourself up and became Australia's first paraplegic triathlete and went back to the Nepean Triathlon so that you could compete. That was in 1994. 1994.
A hand cycle was imported from the US. One of my friends is a fellow para, wheelchair athlete, and he said, do you want to have a go? So you naturally are like, of course I don't want to have a go. And that's when I went, okay, now I've got a bike, I could do a triathlon again. So that's how that came to life. And the bike was called a Freedom Rider, made in the US, made of steel, but it was a starting point. It was a wonderful moment. My friend who I played football with, John Young, he came to visit me in hospital once a week with his wife for 4 months. So we talk about friendship and family. I mean, that's a big ask if you're non-family. So that was something that we did together. He got me, into the water, out of the water, and it was wonderful to cross that finish line. And that was the mountain at the time, which then led on to, the Hawaiian Ironman, watching that on television, which led on to the English Channel, which led on to many other things.
Okay, which he says with a dismissive wave of his hand, Amanda.
He does.
And in so doing, you became one of the world's first Hawaii Ironman triathletes in a wheelchair. In the last one that you competed in, you actually got in, you crossed the finish line ahead of the time for able-bodied athletes. And you also swam the English Channel, which took you the best part of 13 hours.
I saw a wheelchair athlete participate and he didn't finish. Light went off inside of my head. Maybe I could be the first to do so. And it took 3 attempts. The first attempt, I missed the bike, cut off by 40 minutes, but finished in 14:52. Went back the next year, got a flat, missed the cut off by 15 minutes. This is the bike time. And finished in 14:39. Went back the next year, and there's now an official category. So I was very happy to cross the line and be and win the category, and to be acknowledged in the world of triathlon.
And again, to put that in perspective for people who are not familiar with it, we're talking about a 3.8K swim. We're talking about a 180K bike ride, and then a marathon. And you're doing all of that with your arms because your legs aren't working. I mean, that's 14 hours or 13 hours or 12 hours of non-stop punishment on your upper body so that you can complete this triathlon. This is no small feat. No,
it's not. But I think, again, I used to watch that as a kid and was just in awe of the athletes who were able to push themselves to do that. I mean, weirdly, I found myself many years later lining up and being a part of it. So, yes, it's a tough day in the office. But remember that little boy within me that dreamed about being an athlete. The door closed when I had my accident in terms of running, but it also opened up in a different way in terms of being a wheelchair athlete. So I started to live the dream in a different way than I thought as a little boy.
You go on to swim the English Channel in about 13 hours. How far across is the channel?
Direct line is 21 and a half miles, which I think equates to near 30 kilometres. But that's rare that happens given the currents and the tides and everything else that goes along. So I was very happy to get to the other side. That was another huge challenge. And my thing, Justin, I know we're talking about family, but my piece is always to be seen as equal, not less than equal. So we briefly spoke about language. And after my accident, I was classified as a paraplegic who then has a disability. And a disability implies that one is less than another. So to diss someone is not to encourage. So I always found that if I could go and chase some really big sporting dreams, and hopefully in time have a foundation for kids in wheelchairs to give them a platform to see themselves as who they are, not under an umbrella or a category that says they're less than others. So that's one of the reasons why I push myself so hard doing Ironmans and challenges and stuff, to see myself as equal and then have that opportunity for others to do the same.
I think it's ironic that I've always said that John was then still striving to be seen as equal, and yet he had so far surpassed most of us in equality. He had gone, his achievements at that stage, being the first wheelchair athlete to complete the Hawaiian Ironman and then to swim the English Channel, the persistence and determination, he was so far and above equal, and yet he still saw himself in the need to prove himself as equal, which is an ironic kind of thing when I look at it.
It is. Now, Amanda, at what point do you come into the picture? Because John's still single at this point, right? He hasn't met you. He's not married to you. When do you come into the picture? He's swum the Channel. He's done the triathlons. He wins medals at the Paralympics.
We met in 2004, actually, when John was writing his first book, and I was working for the publishing company that published the book. So we met then, and he was actually training for an event called Ultraman, which is basically 3 Ironmans rolled into one. which he was training for as a wheelchair athlete, which seems even more crazy to the average human. We went through the publishing process at that point very as much as, an author, and I was head of sales and marketing. So then we were friends for about sort of 3 years through that process, and our relationship changed and we really came together as a couple about a year out from the Beijing Paralympics for adaptive rowing that John was training for.
And then John goes to win medals at that Olympics with his rowing partner, and the two of you become a couple. The two of you get married, start a family eventually. And I'm just listening to this story about this guy who's been hit by a truck, become a paraplegic, and then who goes and does things that most able-bodied athletes don't do. I mean, John, am I right in remembering you were the first athlete, period, to both complete an Ironman, a Hawaiian Ironman, and swim the Channel? Is that correct?
I like, in the early days, I liked the idea of being the first. So with the Ironman, and I think just digressing very briefly, but I think that opportunities present themselves to all of us all the time. We just don't always have our eyes and ears open to those opportunities. Example, that I saw the Ironman on television. So I'm watching it. There's a wheelchair athlete. He doesn't finish. I saw that. A friend of mine had swum the English Channel. He said, if I can do it, you can do it. That's how that came about. And given that I was fortunate enough to be sponsored by Nike and Gatorade and these wonderful companies, which I clearly would never have been sponsored with if I was running around playing football. So I was always looking for something, and they were encouraging me to do so. So when I found out that no wheelchair athlete had done the English Channel as well as any Ironman, that was an added bonus to be the first, but also, again, to inspire kids in wheelchairs.
Yeah, and it's about this idea of being visible and being literally representing so that people can see it and believe it. And somebody did that for you, and then you were able to do that for even more people. Amanda, I'm going to come back to you for a minute. I mean, John, honestly, he sounds like Superman.
Yeah.
Now you hear the real story.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. I mean, you've made a commitment here. You've met this guy and decided that he is all that, but you didn't know how it was all going to work out. So for you, as an able-bodied woman marrying a man who, for want of a better term, and I recognise
was in a wheelchair.
Well, yeah, a man who's in a wheelchair. He's clearly
paraplegic, yeah.
Clearly arguing that there's no such thing as a disability, but here's this guy who's in a wheelchair. What concerns and fears did you have as this relationship started to bloom and blossom and move in a really strong direction? And what about your family? What were they saying about marrying someone who couldn't walk?
I think, I get asked that question quite often, and it's a really strange thing because there weren't any. I mean, I think if you asked anyone who is, married to or in a relationship with, or who, whose partner has any form of special need, or whether they're in a wheelchair or they're hearing impaired or missing their fingers, I don't know. You kind of fall in love with a person, not a situation. And I'm not saying that it's for all people, because I'm sure that there are some people that would not have gone any further with a blossoming kind of friendship and relationship because John was in a wheelchair. I mean, but for me it didn't really. But then there are just other people. I think that it kind of doesn't feature. You understand the limitations around it, and that you're not going to be going to the beach in the weekend. At the same time, it's very much John. He walks with wheels. There wasn't much that he didn't do. John used to put out the rubbish in his wheelchair. I mean, it used to take 15 or 20 minutes, but, I just used to let him go and do it because, I don't know, he was capable of doing it. It's not, John's very capable, and I think, and always has been, completely independent, completely. So I think initially maybe my family probably in particular my father, the concern was, and it's like everybody, the concern is, are you having sex and are you a carer or a girlfriend? What level of care? I mean, that's anyone who looks at you, so I realised that what's going on in their head is, what goes on behind closed doors. And I guess that was a fair enough concern maybe for my family, but honestly, it really didn't come up that much. They knew John's story, so they knew it because I'd been working with John, so they kind of knew that he was a reasonably extraordinary, independent person anyway.
I love that phrase. He was reasonably extraordinary.
Yeah. So I guess there wasn't, genuinely for me, it wasn't a particular consideration. I mean, I did know him beforehand, so I guess I knew to an extent how he lived day to day and how he moved around, and it was more important to me, I think, at that stage when the relationship started to change. It was about our connection, our values, and where we were heading as a couple, not whether we could go to the beach or not, in the most part.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that parents around the country right now are thinking to themselves, okay, so we've got John Maclean who can put the rubbish out in a wheelchair. Come on, kids, lift your game. You can do this. You can
We're
clean
still
your room.
struggling getting our son too. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about your son because you've had a son come along, Jack. He's 10 years old now at the time that we're having this conversation. And he has been privy to some pretty extraordinary events. We've really only told, I think, can I say this without diminishing what you've done? We've told the easy part of the story so far. Because for people who are not familiar with John and Amanda's story, what happens after they're married and after the Beijing Olympics and these medals at the Olympics is that John gets it in his head, and this is, I guess, where I really want you guys to fill in the gaps. But John gets it in his head that he's going to walk again. He says, I've heard of this thing called tremor therapy, and I've got these people around me who are saying that I've only got a partial paralysis. It's not a complete paralysis, and therefore I reckon with the right people and with the right tools and with the right opportunities and with the right sponsors and the right money and the right this, that and the other, I reckon I can walk again.
The interesting thing for me, from the day I met John, so I've known John for, just over 15, or coming up 14 years or so, but he has always told me he's going to walk again. Always. It was only ever a matter of time or technology or the world changing or some sort of scientific breakthrough. As far as John was concerned, he was always going to walk again. It's just a natural, innate. John lives on the sunny side. He projects a focus and a direction that is positive and moving forward. And, in his mind, he creates, you've always been like that. That's who I live with. So he's always said he's going to walk again. And when this opportunity came up, it kind of did. And I mean, I think he was like, you can explain how it happened. I'm shocked. And he's like, see? I told you so.
So what's this opportunity that shocked you? And John said, yeah, of course.
So this is, maybe getting up a little bit off topic, and I'll be very brief. So I kind of visualised this and dreamed about this, and then it unfolded. So a dear friend had gone up to see Ken Ware. This is the guy who came up with the tremor therapy, and we just happened to be in Noosa at the same time. So we had dinner, and he said, I'm going to go and see this guy. And I said, okay, let's catch up, before we go back. And so he said, I went up there limping. I came back sprinting. So we go up there because he said, you should check it out. It might help your shoulder, which I had a sore shoulder from all the rotation over the years. And we kind of explored the piece about being present around, let's not talk about your history. Let's talk about what you're capable of and see what that looks like. And then through a series of questions and trying, and using equipment that was new, going through a completely different therapy again, kind of unlocked that I always had the potential, but the language that I was using for such a long time was, my name's John Maclean, I'm a wheelchair athlete. So therefore I stayed in that bubble, and I think we're all in our own bubbles. And kind of can help burst that bubble to say, do you want to be John Maclean, wheelchair athlete, or, what do you want? I said, I want to walk. So, and then I kind of had a throwaway line, wouldn't it be amazing to walk on the beach with Amanda, kind of ha-ha. And we just kept on playing with that piece and being present, and that came to life. So you can see that the importance of being in the moment really opened up that door to me. A gentleman by the name of Darren Piera has a company called Neuromuscular Orthotics, helping kids and adults who need braces and parts to help them improve their walking. He saw that story. He got in touch. I went to Melbourne. I got fitted up with the leg braces, and then I kind of lined up. The added bonus was having a foundation for kids in wheelchairs. We raised a whole lot of money, no pressure. And I asked a whole lot of friends, would they be kind enough to come and join me?
You've gone through this therapy and you've just sort of, as you've shared this story so far, you're kind of
saying, yeah, we did a bit of this and we did a bit of that. But you've gone through some intense therapy, and I'm assuming that it wasn't for a couple of weeks.
Well, initially it happened very quickly, so it was just a shift of focus.
I think it's important to note, though, I mean, it's not like John just got out of his wheelchair and started walking. I mean,
right.
You know, and when we say walking, it was, you know, that's probably a little generous. I mean, it was taking steps and, you know, and increasingly, and in a reasonably quick, short period of time, over sort of 6 weeks or so, you know, he was taking more steps, but they were very unusual looking steps. I mean, you know, it's just important for people to know. I mean, he just didn't get out of his wheelchair and walk.
Because those muscles haven't borne a load for 20-odd years, 30-odd years.
And his right leg is all bar the shouting, is 99% paralysed.
So there was always trepidation about putting any weight on my right leg, given, you know, bone density and how much it's atrophied over all those years. So I was very cautious about. But then Ken said, you know, you've got to trust it. Let's see what happens. So as I was continually to do that, a lot of anxiety comes up with this process as well, because you have your eyes closed, which is different. You're switching off the visual cortex, and he loads you or puts resistance on in terms of a piece of equipment, whether you're pushing or pulling, and get you to go really slowly. So that heightens all those levels of anxiety. And Ken's skill is to help you manage that anxiety, to bring it back to a baseline to see what's possible. So you're letting go with the I can't, just to get into the space of, okay, let's just see, let's explore. So Ken uses a lot of language that's encouraging to try, and then seeing what the response of that trying is. So Amanda's spot on. It just didn't get up and start walking. There was a lot of work spent in the lead up, and I guess I was the ideal candidate, given being incomplete and wanting to try to apply an effort to get a result.
Okay, and you've just mentioned the lead up, so let's dive into this. As you begin to see progress, you begin to take steps, you begin to apply load to your legs. You then decide that you're going to go back to the Nepean triathlon again, but this time you're going to compete as an able-bodied athlete. You haven't run, you haven't jogged, you haven't ridden a bike, but this is where you're going to go. And so over the next little while, you actually start to train. You get back onto a bike. You start to push the pedals. You start to actually carry load through your legs so that you can do this. And Amanda, you're watching this, and what are you thinking? Is he crazy, or are you thinking he's going to do this? He's starting to bring sponsors on and raise funds for the foundation to help kids in wheelchairs. And are you thinking, oh, this is impossible? Or do we need to watch our language here and only be encouraging?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time when I saw him walking on a treadmill when he came back from seeing Ken, and, you know, he was supported, but per se taking steps on a treadmill very slowly. And I'm standing in the gym with a girlfriend, and I'm like, this is real, right? You know, like, John's like, because it was a bit like, you know, here he goes again doing something else extraordinary. But to watch that was really, it was very extraordinary for me. I mean, and then to watch him improve and to see firsthand the tenacity with which he approached it, because I saw Beijing, you know, with his adaptive rowing and the focus and mentality of him, you know, as an athlete and what that required. You know, then by this stage when he started walking, we had Jack. Jack was about 3. You know, and John sort of approached just, you know, learning to walk again like he did an event. So, again, I mean, for people who are listening, it's really important to note that, I mean, John trained to walk. You know, I was the income earner at that point, so and that was working well for us. John had the flexibility, and we devoted John's time to training to walk. So he spent all day, every day, you know, walking, you know, training, building strength. I mean, he lived that like he was doing an event. So not many people have that, you know, the luxury of just saying, okay, I'm going to just focus my whole life on walking. So he had, you know, family life, but, you know, it wasn't an easy thing to do. It took up a lot of time and energy from his point of view in particular. And, from us as a family, I mean, it was a very, and then the goal became for him to do the Nepean triathlon as a conventional athlete, which was going to involve a 10K walk at the end. And, his walking was slow, and it was still unsure and uncertain. But I'll let you evolve on how that panned out.
Yeah, so you've set this goal and you've said, I'm going to go back to the Nepean triathlon, the one that I was training for in 1988 when I was hit by the truck, the one that I competed in for the first time as a wheelchair athlete. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it in 2014 as an able-bodied athlete. And, of course, they were happy to have you along and you did it as a fundraiser. What I love, and you can see this on YouTube. In fact, I'll share a link in the show notes for the podcast. John does the swim, then he does the ride, but he completes that 10K run/walk with you, Amanda, and with Jack. The three of you cross that. I'm going to get all weepy just talking about it. Yeah. You cross that finish line together.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. I mean, I think to put in the picture, the 10K walk, it was in Penrith. It was in November. It was 37 degrees, and John had a full body, like thick thermal, like a boxing suit to keep his body a bit straighter. Then he had woolen tights on to hold the leg brace, and a long sleeve, cycling shirt, and the leg brace and poles and things in 37-degree heat. And it took him 3.5 hours just to do the 10K walk, having already done the 1K swim and the 30K bike ride. So, the walk was long and it was slow, and it was hard. I mean, it was hard to watch, from my point of view, because he deteriorated through the walk. His feet had turned into, not particularly good, like hamburgery looking little things, which wasn't very good. So we were patching him up, as he was walking. We were trying to keep him hydrated. The heat, heat and exhaustion did get to him, and we lost him a couple of times. Not lose, but, he did have to lie down a couple of times when we were pouring ice into his cap, and to be there watching it and be alongside him it was quite an anxious kind of time. And then Jack just joined us. He was just on 4 then. He just joined us for the last sort of half a kilometre under duress, telling us, could we hurry up? It was hot because John was walking so slow. But, we lost him. We lost John. When I say lost, he sort of passed out a little bit about 100 metres out.
Wow.
And we were trying to get him back, and Jack's leaning down and tapping him on the face, going, Daddy, come on, Daddy, wake up, Daddy, wake up. And obviously John did a minute. And I think there was no way that he was never going to do it, but it was an anxious thing to go through as someone so close to him, I think, let alone for what he was experiencing himself, obviously.
I watched the clip on YouTube and see you finishing, and it doesn't look like that. It looks like one of those Rocky moments, like, victory, yeah. And we've done it. So hearing that additional story just makes it that much, perhaps not quite as romanticized, but
no, it was hard.
But it just makes it sound extraordinary. And then, of course, in the same clip, there's you and your family, John, walking along the beach, achieving the dream. And we began this conversation as you walked. You literally, you're walking around your house. You walked into the room. And as you've said, your right leg still doesn't quite work just right. There's still some issues with that, but it's astounding to be having a conversation with a guy who is not supposed to walk, and you're walking. And like you said, it's about that language, and it's about that belief and being present and saying, well, where do I want to go? Now, we're running short on time because this is such an amazing story, and we could just talk about this for the whole day. But a couple of quick questions. First of all, what do you think it's like for Jack? Does he see you guys as exemplars and extraordinary, inspirational examples? Or does he roll his eyes and get tired of these resilience-focused, you can do it parents who are always saying, look how far you've come, Jack, now how far can you go?
Yeah, so that was words from my dad to me. And you know the backstory for him to ask that question at that time. So I think if you look at 3 generations, let's talk about my dad's, let's talk about mine, and let's talk about Jack's. So I mentioned that my dad's love was singing. not mine. My love has always been movement. So that's been my journey. And Jack's, I think it's safe to say for us, is that he's a creative little guy he lives in his head, and it's just awesome to watch him be himself. So we have no expectation in him, being a sport guy, because neither would my dad have had any expectation of me being a singer. So I don't say those questions to Jack about. I do say that I always wanted to try his best. Mum and Dad would like him to do that. So I think he's his own little guy doing his own little thing, and we love him and support him for whatever he chooses to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we initially, before we knew that he really wasn't. I mean, he plays sport, but he's just not a sporty guy. I mean, he's not fussed. He's not highly competitive. He just, if he likes to do it, he goes and does it. If he doesn't want to do it, he just doesn't do it. But he loves to draw. He's a great artist. He loves imagination play, all of that sort of thing. And I think before we worked that out, we were really conscious that we didn't want him growing up in John's shadow. So, we didn't want people saying, have you done your first triathlon yet, Jack? And, when are you, well, one day, you'll have to do a double crossing of the channel, and, just those sorts of things, which are natural enough things to say. And he knows John's story, but he doesn't really pay much attention, if I'm honest, unless he thinks it's quite cool that Dad's got a book. Sometimes, if someone asks and he'll go, oh yeah, my dad's got a book, or maybe there's a movie or something. But he's really pretty nonplussed about it, and we really give him, for us, it's more about him than it is about us, and it's about what he wants to do and supporting where he wants to go. So he does live in as I said, John's very sunny side. So he lives in a very can-do environment, I guess, especially from John's point of view. He sees Dad out there, trying to ride a bike or trying a new leg brace or getting on the treadmill or, but he doesn't really care, too much.
Kids are kind of oblivious, aren't they, sometimes? They are. And that might be a good thing, maybe. Now, Amanda, we're almost out of time, and there are 5 questions that I always wrap every one of these Parenting in Perspective podcasts with. But before we get there, I really want to bring you right into the light, because I'd imagine that the support John's needed over the years is pretty extraordinary. So, John, can you talk a bit about what it's like to be married to Amanda and how the two of you have come together and created that sense of unity and mutual support and belonging that seems to work so well for you both? What makes your marriage go so well?
Yeah, so I guess I was chasing sport dreams for a long time, and then I realised I was kind of missing out. And, a lot of my friends had gone on to get married and have kids. So, we met in unusual circumstances and with the stage of life that we were both at. So the thing that we had straight away, we had things in common in terms of life, lived experiences had. So when I kind of first started to, find out whether Amanda would be remotely interested in me as a partner, then things really started to just fit into its groove. Now, I think it's safe to say, interested in Amanda's perspective, but we're completely opposites, like completely. And that's why it works. So there are times for frustration for both, no doubt. But so Amanda is the glue that keeps our family together, and she gets Jack. I make comment on a regular basis that, for us, in terms of my opinion, she's the world's best mum, and Jack's just so lucky to have his mum as his mum. And, so I sit back every now and again and observe, which is sometimes difficult, but Amanda's just perfect for us as a family, and I'm really lucky to have her as a wife and Jack to have her as a mum.
We often say that John's big picture and I'm detail, and any kind of detail organised person who lives with the big picture dreaming person will understand that there are natural tensions and frustrations that can come with that. So, we're by no means perfect, or have some sort of idyllic marriage by any stretch of the imagination. But what we do have is, I think we pick our fights, and I think we don't sweat the small stuff so much. To a certain extent, we know our role, not know our roles, but we've evolved into our own roles in a way, especially with Jack. And I think there's a difference between, which is, works.
Well, Amanda, I've been watching the way John's speaking about you and the way he looks at you while you're speaking, and I feel confident in my professional opinion to say that I'm pretty sure he's crazy about you.
Nice.
Good observations, Doc.
Now, guys, let's wrap this up with these 5 questions that I really love to play with and get into. If we were to ask Jack his favourite thing to do with you, what would he say?
At the moment, he loves cars. In particular, his favourite's a Lamborghini Gyoza. So I take him to look at really cool, fast cars.
It'll be the nighttime snuggle. I'm kind of the real mum, so it's like the snuggle at night before he goes to bed. That's kind of his thing with me.
Yeah, best of both worlds. Okay, what's been your trickiest parenting moment?
Jack's kind of anxiety thing. So I kind of struggle around that. It's not my strength at all. That would be something I struggle around.
I think Jack does suffer from some anxiety and some low self-esteem kind of issues, so he can get triggered and he can have difficulties in that space, and trying to get him out of that and having the right amount of patience and understanding and connection to pull him out is hard for us. He has his own little quirks, and they can be quite hard to manage.
Yeah, so tricky when you're such a driven person or a driven couple, and there's so much hope and there's so much to achieve, and then you've got this person who won't quite listen to you because they're caught up in what's right in front of them and it's dragging them down. And you want to build them up, but they're just so in the moment that you can't. What about this question? This is my third of the 5. If you could spend an hour with Jack at any age at all, what age would you pick and why?
I love where he's at the moment because I'm always kind of trying to live in the moment, and he's evolving in the way he is at the moment. It's like just awesome. But if I was to look back, I miss those cuddles when he wanted to give us cuddles. We particularly give Daddy a cuddle. Where now it's us for a cuddle, he kind of turns his back, so it's me kind of cuddling him, not him cuddling me. But all stages have been amazing, and I'm loving him where he's right now.
That is impossible for me to answer. I would have every single moment all over again. I'd have him back as a baby, as a 3-year-old. I'd have him back in his terrible 2, anytime, any way. He's an awesome little guy, and has been right the way through.
I've asked that question a lot of times, Amanda. Nobody's ever said that, and that is just so beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, really? I just couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't distinguish one from the other. But yeah. Yeah.
No matter how good life's been, and no matter how glad you are to be in the moment, John, what are you most looking forward to as parents?
I'm a father. I look forward to being a grandfather, but I think that's going to take a bit of time. That's why I've got to keep, Justin, that's why I've got to keep being healthy so I can be around for a while.
Seeing who Jack becomes and what he overcomes is the thing for me. I'm really interested to see who he becomes, how this creativity that he has manifests as he gets older, and how he starts to manage himself and learn about his own self and his anxieties and things. I've had issues with that myself, and they came later in life for me, and I think our focus is trying to help him to understand who he is and how to best manage when things don't go to plan. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he takes on the world, I guess.
Final question. If you could go back to John and Amanda Maclean as young parents, even though you weren't quite so young, but you're having one of those tough moments, you've got no experience at actually raising a child, what advice would you give yourself if you were starting all over again?
Just stay in the moment, because the moments are so fleeting, they go by so quick. So, sometimes he's on his trampoline and I'm thinking about other things when all he wants me to do is watch him on the trampoline. So examples of, staying in the moment. But, again, we're kind of loving him evolve. But, it's challenging with all the things that are happening all the time about trying to stay in the moment. But that's what I'll do.
Great. What about you, Amanda?
I think for me it's patience and intuition. I think not that I have had a lack of patience, but just really understanding that taking the time to understand him as a person, rather than thinking that maybe, the terrible twos are the terrible twos. There might be something more to that, or misbehaviour is misbehaviour. A lot of the time, for Jack in particular, as he's grown up, the more time that I've spent trying to help him and work out who he is, the more we've been able to connect, and that emotional engagement and understanding who he is, and that sometimes triggers for behaviour. The behaviour is something deeper. It's not just a belligerent kind of reaction to something. And I think I would tell myself earlier just to understand that sometimes kids aren't just, naughty for the sake of being naughty. I mean, or they're not, sad for the sake of being sad. There's actually, there's things behind there, and, use your intuition.
Wonderful. So if people want to find out more about you, John, you've written a book. Tell us about the book or books.
Yes. Again, taking the liberty of using the question that was posed to me from my dad. The title of the book is How Far Can You Go? Thought that was quite apt. So that's the name of the book.
And I've read that book and I love it. And it's available online everywhere. And it's just, it tells the story so brilliantly. So How Far Can You Go is the book. And
we can also, people can access that via our website, johnmaclean.com.au. Yeah, so excited about, almost finished the next book. It's about to come out. What are the steps to change? Change is my topic. What's the methodology? So that's coming out soon. That's titled Change, a Constant Challenge.
And I love the play on words there with steps to change. And lastly, you run a foundation, the John Maclean Foundation. Tell us a bit about that and how people can find out more.
Yeah, the foundation, jmf.com.au, John Maclean Foundation. We help kids in wheelchairs around our country to improve their quality of life via, it could be a piece of sporting equipment, it could be a computer, it could be a musical instrument. Often the families are doing it quite tough, sometimes individual families. So it's means tested. We get out there to try and give a little bit back, and that's what the John Maclean Foundation does, helping kids in wheelchairs.
Well, John and Amanda Maclean, thank you so much for spending this time so generously and sharing your story and your advice and your wisdom and ideas. It's been wonderful to chat.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us. It's been great.
Well, if that conversation has not inspired you to get out and live life to the fullest, I don't know what will. What an incredible story. I really hope that you've taken some inspiration from John and Amanda's story as a result of this Parenting in Perspective podcast. I love the phrase that Amanda used to describe John, reasonably extraordinary. And that visual image of John taking the bins out in his wheelchair, even though it would take him 15 minutes. Just wonderful resilience, tenacity, growth, extraordinary stuff. You can find out more about John and the work of the John Maclean Foundation at johnmaclean.com.au. And we've also put his book, How Far Can You Go?, into our Happy Families website, the What We Love page, where we highlight all the things that we think are great. You can jump on there, and that's the easiest way to find. It's one of many easy ways to find his book, How Far Can You Go? Well, coming up on the next Parenting in Perspective podcast, we're going to be talking about kids' independence and resilience with author, TV host and founder of the free-range kids movement, Lenore Skenazy.
There's no way to be a parent without being worried, or at least I haven't figured that out yet. When my mom let me walk to school, and it was age 5, and she didn't do it because she was a free-range mom or a crazy person. She was doing it because everybody let their kids walk to school at age 5. You weren't thinking that a normal mom, a normal good mom, should be thinking about the murder of their child every time the child was out of their sight. That is new, and it feels normal because it is normal to worry, but I feel like these new extravagant worries are superimposed on us by a culture.
That's the founder of the Free Range Kids Movement and letgrow.org, Lenore Skenazy, my next guest on the Parenting in Perspective podcast. And as always, just before we wrap this up, thank you so very much to everybody who has left reviews and 5-star ratings at the Apple Podcasts reviews space. Thank you to Cav1980 who said, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks so much. I recently attended your webinar, Lightening the Lockdown Load, and I am a fan. It's been 3 hours and I've been going through the topics in your podcast that are relevant for me and my family. I'm excited to try some of the strategies you've suggested. We'll let you know how I go. Thanks so much again." Well, Cav1980, thank you for the 5-star review and spending 3 hours just to get started on all of the podcasts that we've got. We've got over 120, nearly about 130 episodes now. And the podcast is going from strength to strength. It's great to have you listening, and it's just wonderful to get your feedback. Really appreciate those reviews, by the way. Please, if you listen to the podcast, take a couple of minutes, find the Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast on Apple Podcasts and leave that review, because everybody gets to find out about the podcast when you do that. The ratings and the reviews make the podcast more visible. Apple prioritizes it, and we get to help a whole lot more families to be happier and to hear these great conversations. So please help us to get the word out, or just share it from your podcast app so that people can listen that way as well. If you'd like more info on how I can help your family flourish, especially if you'd like to have ongoing monthly support via our amazing and growing Happy Families memberships, visit happyfamilies.com.au. The family, like I said, it's growing. It's getting bigger every day. You can also visit my Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families. And as always, thank you to Justin Roylon for his work in producing the podcast and making it sound so great. And thank you for listening to Parenting in Perspective, a Happy Families podcast.